The year was 1867, and the Colorado frontier lay under a sky the color of old iron. Winter hadn't come down yet, but the nights carried a bite sharp enough to make a man thankful for fire and walls. Jack Callahan had both, though not much else. His spread was small, just a clapboard house, a leaning barn, and a stretch of hard ground nobody wanted. He wasn't the kind of man neighbors dropped by on, and that suited him fine. He lived alone, worked alone, kept to himself. Folks in town knew him as a former cavalryman, the kind who carried scars inside and out, and they gave him his space. That night, he was mending a harness under the lamplight when the sound came. Faint. Scratch, scratch against the barn door. At first, he thought it was a coyote nosing for scraps. He set his tools down, slid his revolver from its holster, and went outside. The moon rode high, throwing silver across the hardpan. His boots crunched gravel as he crossed the yard. Scratch, scratch again. He drew closer, thumb easing back the hammer. The barn loomed ahead, smelling of hay and horse. He swung the door open quick, ready for trouble. Not a coyote, a boy. The child crouched in the straw, thin as a fence rail, eyes wide and wild in the lamplight spilling from Jack's doorway. His hair hung long and matted, his skin the color of earth. Cheyenne, Jack realized at once. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, though hunger had whittled him down so small he might have passed for 6. The boy swayed as if the sight of Jack alone might knock him over. Then he collapsed face first into the straw. Jack froze. The revolver felt suddenly heavy, foolish in his hand. He shoved it back in the holster and crouched. The boy's ribs pressed sharp under his ragged shirt. His lips were cracked. The child was starving. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough talk in town to know what feeding a hungry Cheyenne meant. The ranchers hated the tribes, swore they were no better than wolves. Men had been shot for less than harboring one. But looking at the boy, Jack couldn't summon hate. He only saw a child who hadn't had a decent meal in days. Hell, he muttered under his breath. He lifted the boy carefully and carried him across the yard to the house. The boy weighed next to nothing. Jack set him down by the hearth, stoked the fire higher, and fetched a pot of broth left over from supper. When the steam reached the boy's face, his eyes fluttered open. They were dark, glimmering with fear and need. Jack spooned broth slow, tipping it against the boy's lips. At first nothing, then the child swallowed, desperate. Jack fed him in silence, each spoonful easing something raw in his own chest. He remembered another child, his own, gone before his 6th birthday, fever burning him to ash no doctor could quench. That memory was a wound that never healed, and here it was, torn open by a stranger's son. The boy drifted back into sleep once his belly held a little weight. Jack sat back, staring into the flames. He knew the risk he'd taken. If anyone found out, it would be his hide. Still, he couldn't push the child back into the cold. Not tonight. By morning, word would spread in town that Cheyenne war parties had been seen near the river. It wasn't the first rumor, and it wouldn't be the last. Jack rode in for supplies after sunup. Hat low, coat collar turned against the wind. The trading post was crowded, men speaking in hard, clipped tones. Someone spat and said a child had gone missing from a nearby Cheyenne band. Another swore it was the prelude to raids, that the tribes were testing white resolve by letting one of their young vanish close to settler land. Jack kept his face blank, his hand steady as he picked up flour, salt, beans. He heard one rancher mutter, "Better to hang the brat if he's found. No good comes of sparing wolves' cubs." Laughter followed, bitter and sharp. Jack's hand clenched around the sack of beans. He forced himself to move slow, pay his tab, and walk out without a word. His mare's hooves rang hard against the frozen earth as he rode home. The boy was awake when he returned, sitting on the edge of the cot where Jack had laid him. His legs dangled, too weak to hold him steady. His eyes tracked Jack warily, but not without a spark of trust. Jack set down the supplies and crouched. "You hungry?" he asked. The boy stared blankly, then whispered one word in halting English. "Hungry." Jack swallowed against the lump in his throat. He cooked beans and bread, and the boy ate until his stomach cramped. Afterward, he curled up near the fire like a pup, eyes half closed. Jack studied him, skin stretched thin, arms too small, yet still alive. The boy's spirit hadn't broken. Night fell again, bringing silence broken only by the wind moaning through the eaves. Jack sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. The boy stirred and edged closer, finally resting his small hand on Jack's sleeve. No words, just that touch. Jack let him be. A man could forget the world for a moment like that. He called the child little hawk the next morning, after the bird that had built a nest high in the rafters of his barn. The boy repeated the word softly as though tasting it. Hawk. Jack smiled despite himself. The peace didn't last. At dawn the following day, Jack woke to a sound that set every nerve on edge. A low thunder, growing louder, rolling across the plain. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, breath clouding in the chill air. Dust rose on the horizon, thick and fast-moving. Riders, dozens, no, hundreds. The thunder resolved into the pounding of hooves, the flash of feathers, painted faces, lances tipped with iron. They came in a wall, 200 strong, fanning out in front of his ranch like a tide of war. The ground shuddered under the weight of them. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He tightened his grip on the Winchester, the wood worn smooth under his palm. His barn door creaked. Behind him, he heard the boy's quick breathing. The riders pulled up in a line that stretched the length of his field. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the restless shifting of horses. Their eyes fixed on him with fire and accusation. From their center rode a man with a hawk's feather trailing from his hair, his chest painted with ochre. His bearing left no doubt this was their chief. Jack stood in the yard, alone, rifle across his chest, the weight of 200 warriors pressing down like a storm. The boy stepped out of the barn behind him, small and trembling. Jack eased his body sideways, shielding him. The warrior's eyes narrowed. The boy clutched Jack's coat with one thin hand, and Jack Callahan, a man who thought he'd buried his heart years ago, realized he was about to fight. If fight, he must, for the life of a starving child who had stumbled into his barn. The morning air held still as judgment, waiting for the first word, the first shot, the first step that would decide whether his ranch stood or burned, whether he lived or died. And 200 pairs of eyes stared back, silent, unyielding, demanding an answer. The horses stood restless, snorting clouds into the cold morning, their riders unmoving, painted eyes locked on the lone man in front of the weather-beaten ranch house. Jack Callahan held his rifle steady, though the tremor in his jaw betrayed the storm inside him. The boy gripped his coat with desperate fingers, eyes wide as saucers. 200 warriors stretched across the field in a wall of silence, every spear point glittering like frozen fire in the sun. Then the line parted, and a rider pushed forward. He was older, scar carved across one cheek, his bearing sharp as steel. The weight of command clung to him. He rode a tall paint horse, feathered headdress trailing down his shoulders, chest painted with ochre and ash. The rest of the warriors shifted as he dismounted. His moccasins touched the earth like a judgment delivered. His voice carried across the still air. "You," he said, in heavy but clear English. "Why is our child here?" The boy pressed closer to Jack, trembling. Jack's throat went dry. He could lie, but 100 eyes would see through it. He could hand the boy over, but the thought cut deeper than any blade. He swallowed hard. "Found him in my barn," Jack said, voice steady. "Starving. Near dead. I gave him food, nothing more." The warriors murmured low among themselves, a sound like distant thunder. The chief's eyes burned into him. "You steal our children to make them weak. White men do this. You feed them, then use them. That's not what happened." Jack's hand tightened on the Winchester. "Boy, would have frozen by dawn if I hadn't brought him in." The boy stepped out from behind him suddenly, surprising them both. He clutched Jack's sleeve, small chin lifting. He muttered something quick in Cheyenne, voice cracking but strong enough to carry. A ripple ran through the warriors. The chief's eyes narrowed, and for a moment his hard mask slipped. The boy's mother had been found. She stepped forward from the ranks. Her cry cut the air, sharp and raw. She rushed past the line of braves, dropping to her knees before her son. She pressed his face to hers, sobbing, rocking him against her chest. Warriors behind her murmured, shoulders easing with relief, though suspicion lingered. Jack lowered his rifle slightly, heart pounding in his ears. The chief spoke again. "You bring back what is ours, but still we do not know why." "I told you why," Jack said. "A boy's starving, you feed him. Ain't complicated." A younger warrior, fire in his eyes, shouted in Cheyenne, pointing at Jack. His tone carried the sharpness of hate. Another picked it up. Voices rose. Hands tightened on bows and rifles. The chief raised a hand, silencing them, but his gaze never left Jack. "Your words are not enough. You will come with us. To camp. To speak before all. If you lie, you die." Jack's get clenched. He glanced toward the barn, his land stretching behind him, the quiet life he'd carved out from nothing. If he refused, he'd be cut down where he stood. If he went, he'd ride into the heart of 200 men who hated his kind. Either way, his blood might spill. "I'll ride," he said, voice flat. The chief nodded once. Horses shifted. The boy was gathered up by his mother, still clinging to her. Jack saddled his mare, every motion deliberate, trying not to betray the weight pressing on him. When he swung up into the saddle, the line of warriors shifted, surrounding him like iron bars of a moving cage. They rode east. The plain opened, grass whispering under the wind. Jack's ranch shrank behind him, swallowed by distance. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement, figures on a ridge, rifles glinting. Settlers, ranchers, watching. His stomach sank. He knew what they saw, Jack Callahan, riding in company with painted warriors. By sundown, the whole territory would be whispering traitor. The ride was long, silent but for the thunder of hooves. At last, smoke smudged the horizon. The Cheyenne camp sprawled along a bend of the river, dozens of lodges, hides painted with stories, children darting between fires. Drums beat, low, steady, a heartbeat under the wind. The warriors dismounted, leading Jack into the camp. Eyes followed him from every corner. Women paused in grinding corn, children huddled behind skirts, elders watched with the stillness of stone. Jack felt their judgment as sharp as any blade. The chief stood tall in the center. "Here is the man who held our child," he declared. Murmurs rose like fire catching dry grass. The boy squirmed free from his mother and ran back to Jack's side. He clutched Jack's hand, pulling it down to his small chest. The camp fell silent, stunned. Jack looked down, then back up. He said nothing, but the gesture spoke louder than words. The boy's mother approached, her voice unsteady but fierce. "He fed my son. He saved him." An elder stepped forward, face lined like weathered bark. "Or he planned to use him as others have. We do not forget the schools, the priests, the men who steal." Jack's temper flared. "You think I'd take a child? I buried my own years ago. I know that kind of loss. I wouldn't give it to another man if I could help it." The camp stilled. The chief studied him long, weighing truth against memory. Words. Always words. Jack felt the circle closing, heat prickling his skin. He realized the truth alone would not set him free. These people lived by action, by proof carved into flesh and fire. "What do you want of me?" he asked. The chief's eyes narrowed. "If your heart is clean, you will ride with us. A hunt, a test, then we will see." Jack swallowed hard. He'd hunted buffalo before, but never with 200 eyes watching, never with his life tied to the outcome. He gave a short nod. "All right." They set out at dawn. Warriors fanned across the plain, bows ready, horses quick and sure. Jack rode in their midst, rifle slung across his saddle. The sky stretched endless, wind whipping the grass. Then they found them, buffalo, a great dark tide moving slow across the valley. The ground shook with their weight. The chief gave the call and the hunt began. Warriors thundered forward, arrows flying. The herd broke, bellowing, stampeding. Jack's mare surged beneath him, and instinct took hold. He swung the rifle up, sighted, fired. A bull dropped, legs folding. He wheeled, heart-hammering, fired again, dropping a cow clean. The warriors rode fierce, arrows finding their marks. Dust boiled, hooves thundered. Jack rode in the thick of it, body remembering the rhythm of cavalry charges, the chaos of men and beasts and death. By the time the herd scattered, his breath was ragged, his arms trembling. The camp gathered around the kill. Murmurs rose. Jack had not shamed himself. The chief watched, expression unreadable, then spoke low. "You ride like one of us. You kill clean. Maybe your words have weight." Relief seeped through Jack's bones, but it was short-lived. A scout galloped into camp, breathless, shouting in Cheyenne. The chief's face darkened. He turned to Jack, voice like iron. "Your people. They come with rifles. They mean to strike tonight." Jack's blood chilled. He saw the picture clearly. Ranchers stirred by fear and hate, riding to erase what they didn't understand. And he, caught between two fires, branded traitor by both. The boy tugged his hand, eyes pleading. Jack knelt, gripped the boy's shoulder tight. He understood now. One kindness had set a fuse burning, and before dawn, everything he'd built might lie in ashes. The drums beat faster in the camp, a low thunder rolling through the ground. Warriors painted their faces, checked their weapons. Women gathered children. Smoke curled high into the night sky. War pressed close, heavy as a storm ready to break. Jack stood in the glow of firelight, shadows cutting deep across his face. He knew there was no walking away now. The boy had chosen him, the mother had spoken for him, and the eyes of a nation were on him. If he ran, he was nothing. If he stayed, he might just become something more. The chief came to him at last, gaze sharp. "Tomorrow blood will fall, and we will see what kind of man you are." Jack said nothing. He only tightened his grip on the boy's hand and stared into the flames as if they could show him the road ahead. Night lay heavy over the valley, stars burning sharp above the Cheyenne camp. The fires burned low, smoke twisting into the black sky. Men painted their faces in red and black, horses stamped and tossed their heads as if they felt what was coming. Jack Callahan stood on the edge of the firelight, rifle across his lap, listening to the drums pound like a heartbeat through the earth. Each strike seemed to say what words hadn't. War was coming. The boy slept beside his mother in one of the lodges, but even in sleep he had clutched Jack's coat until he could be pried away. That trust bound Jack tighter than chains. He couldn't walk out now, not when he knew what road toward them through the night. He had seen the faces of his neighbors, the hunger for blood in their eyes. They would not stop at threats. By dawn, they meant to leave this camp in ashes. Jack felt the weight of both worlds pressing him down. On one side, men he'd known for years who'd drunk with him, traded cattle with him, shared war stories in town. On the other, a people who mistrusted him but had shown him more honesty in 2 days than the white ranchers had in years. And between them all, a child who might never have lived to see another sunrise without his hand on him. The chief came to stand by him, tall and silent, his painted chest gleaming with firelight. Iron Bear, they called him. His voice was low when it came. "When the rifles fire, will you stand with us, Callahan?" Jack's fingers tightened on the Winchester. "I'll stand where the boy stands." The chief studied him, unreadable. Then he nodded once, a short gesture that said more than a speech. He left Jack to the shadows and the weight of what was to come. Hours passed. Coyotes cried on the ridges. The camp quieted. Families huddled in silence, warriors sitting cross-legged, weapons across their knees. Jack tried to steady his breath. He thought of his ranch, of the life he'd tried to build in solitude, of the wife he'd buried and the son he never got to see grow. He realized that his life had been little more than waiting for an end, waiting for something to crack the silence inside him. And now here it was. The first shot cracked the night wide open. A rifle roared from the darkness beyond the camp. Then another. Muzzles flared on the ridge, white men screaming as they came charging down with fire and fury. Horses shrieked, dogs barked, children screamed. The camp erupted in chaos. Jack leapt to his feet, heart hammering. Warriors rushed past him, arrows singing, rifles cracking in reply. Fire burst across one of the lodges as a torch flew, canvas going up in a rush of flame. Jack shouldered the Winchester and fired into the charging riders, the recoil jolting through his chest. One man tumbled from his saddle, hit the dirt, and didn't move again. Callahan, a voice roared over the din. Jack turned and saw him. Reed, a rancher from 3 miles downriver, a man Jack had traded horses with more times than he could count. Reed's face twisted with hate in the firelight. "You're riding with them? You damn traitor!" Jack fired back without thinking. Reed ducked, the bullet kicking dust at his feet. They stared across the chaos, 2 men who'd once shared whiskey, now enemies. Flames spread fast. Screams cut through the smoke. Jack heard the boy cry out, high and desperate. He spun, eye-searching. The boy had slipped from his mother's grasp in the confusion, running through the smoke. A settler rider bore down on him, rifle raised. Jack sprinted, boots pounding earth, lung bursting. He fired on the run, the bullet tearing the man from his saddle. He caught the boy up, shielded him with his own body as a volley of shots ripped the air. The boy clung to him, face pressed into his chest, trembling like a trapped bird. Jack shoved him toward his mother, who seized him, tears streaking her painted cheeks. Jack turned back, rage burning hotter than the fires consuming the camp. He found Reed again. The man was stalking through the smoke, pistol in hand, eyes searching. Jack stepped into his path. They faced one another, 10 feet apart, firelight dancing between them. "Move aside, Callahan," Reed growled. "I'll gut every one of them, and you if you stand in the way." Jack leveled his rifle. "You come through me first." "You lost your head," Reed spat. "Fighting for them? After all they've done? You think they'd spare your hide if it was the other way?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Maybe not. But I know this. I don't gun down children to prove I'm a man." For a heartbeat, they stared across the flames, history between them hanging by a thread. Then Reed's finger twitched on the trigger. Jack fired first. The shot cracked, Reed's eyes widened, and he crumpled into the dirt, his pistol falling useless from his hand. Jack stood there, chest heaving, smoke burning his lungs. He didn't feel triumph, only the hollow ache of necessity. The battle raged until the settlers broke. The Cheyenne fought like fire given flesh, pushing the ranchers back, cutting them down. The survivors fled into the night, curses trailing in their wake. Silence returned by degrees, broken by the crackle of burning lodges and the wailing of the wounded. The air stank of blood and smoke. Jack lowered his rifle at last, shoulders heavy. Around him, warriors gathered the fallen, women wept over their dead, the living tending the wounded by the light of the fires. The boy slipped free from his mother again and ran to Jack, throwing thin arms around his waist. Jack rested a rough hand on his hair, pulling him close. Iron Bear approached, blood on his arm, face set like stone. He looked at Jack for a long time, then spoke. "Tonight, you fought as one of us. You bled with us. For that, you are brother." Jack shook his head, voice rough. "I'm no brother. I'm just a man who couldn't let a boy starve." "Sometimes," the chief said, "that is the same thing." Jack met his eyes, saw the truth in them, and for the first time in years felt something inside him loosen. Not peace, not yet, but something close. By dawn, the camp lay in ashes but not broken. The people would move, rebuild. They always had. Jack knew he could return to his ranch, patch his fences, pretend nothing had happened. But he also knew the townsfolk would spit when he walked by, call him traitor, whisper about the night he fought with the Cheyenne. That life was gone, burned away in the fire. As the sun rose blood-red over the plains, Jack saddled his mare. The boy watched him, eyes wide, clinging to his mother's hand. He ran forward, pressed something small into Jack's palm, a feather striped black and white. Jack closed his fist around it. "You keep it," the boy whispered. Jack nodded, tucking the feather into his hatband. He swung into the saddle, looked once more at the camp, at the boy, at the people who had shown him both suspicion and trust. Then he turned his horse toward the horizon. The wind rose behind him, carrying the smell of smoke and the sound of drums. He rode on, not sure where the trail would lead, only that for the first time in years, he was no longer riding alone. And if anyone asked what a man like him learned out there on the edge of two worlds, maybe the answer was simple. A man's worth wasn't measured by the land he held or the guns he carried, but by the moment he chose to reach down and lift a starving child from the dirt. The frontier tested men in ways no war ever could. It stripped them down to bone and marrow, left them nothing but the choice of who they wanted to be when the dust settled. Jack Callahan chose kindness, and for that, his name would never be forgotten by the boy, by the people, by the land itself. So maybe that's the story, plain and true. The West wasn't built on gunpowder alone. Sometimes it was built on something quieter, stronger. The courage to say no when everyone else said yes. The courage to shield the innocent, even when the world called it betrayal. And if you've ridden with me this far, take a moment and carry it with you. Remember Jack Callahan, the cowboy who stood between a starving child and a world that wanted him gone. If this tale moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Speak it. Keep it alive. Because the frontier may be gone, but the test it gave a man, well, that test is still with us. The morning broke hard and gray, a thin sheet of ice clinging to the troughs in the yard. Jack Callahan stood with his rifle across his chest, eyes fixed on the horizon where smoke still curled from the campfires of the Cheyenne encampment. The uneasy truce of the night before weighed on him like a stone strapped to his back. He had spent years carving out a life in solitude, walls high and heart shut tight. Yet here he was, bound by a child's hungry eyes and the debt of a people who had chosen against all odds to wait rather than strike. He shifted his weight as the barn door creaked open. Little running bird stepped out barefoot, hair tangled but eyes clear. He carried the scrap of cornbread Jack had given him, gnawing it slow, as if afraid it might vanish. Behind him, old gray fox emerged, moving with the deliberate grace of a man who knew every second was watched. He gave Jack a nod, just a tilt of the chin, nothing more. Respect or warning Jack couldn't say. The sound of hooves broke the silence. Jack's heart thumped as three riders appeared from the ridge, kicking up frost with every gallop. Dusty coats, long rifles across their saddles. He didn't need to squint to know they weren't Cheyenne. No, these were white men, settlers from town or drifters looking to cash in on fear. They pulled up hard at the fence line, horses snorting, and the leader barked across the cold air. "Callahan, you got Injuns on your land. Thought you'd be smarter in this. You planning to feed the whole damn tribe?" Jack kept his face stone still. "They're not here for a fight." The man spat in the dirt. "Not yet. You keep throwing scraps their way, they'll think this valley belongs to em. Next thing, they'll burn you out same as the last rancher who gave him quarter." Gray Fox's eyes narrowed, though he said nothing. Running Bird froze, clutching the last bite of cornbread to his chest. Jack shifted his rifle. "You best turn that talk around before it gets you killed." The rider smirked. Big words for a man alone. Alone. Jack tilted his head toward the tree-line. The faint movement of warriors, silent, watching, shifted like smoke in the branches. The men on horseback saw it too, and their smirks faltered. "Turn back," Jack said, voice flat as iron. "You don't want this ground today." For a moment, it looked like blood would spill then and there. The riders exchanged glances, weighed their odds, and finally cursed low, yanking their reins. They rode off, but not without tossing one last warning over their shoulders. "You'll regret siding with M. Callahan. White folks won't forgive a traitor." The echo of hooves faded into the hills. Jack exhaled slow, his breath ghosting in the air. Gray Fox studied him a long while before speaking. "You choose path with no return. Both worlds turn against you." Jack met his gaze. Maybe, but the boy was starving. Sometimes right's all a man's got left. The chief gave no reply, but something softened in the set of his shoulders. He beckoned Running Bird and walked back toward camp, leaving Jack with the weight of his choice. By midday the sky had cleared, but tension sat heavier than storm clouds. Jack worked the barn, pitching hay and hauling water, though every creak of saddle leather or snap of twig kept his nerves wound tight. He knew the riders would return, maybe with more men, maybe with torches, and when they did, it wouldn't just be his land at stake. It would be all of them. Toward evening, the riders did return. Not 3 this time, but closer to 20. Settlers, drifters, hired guns. Some he recognized from a saloon in town, men who'd sneered when he kept to himself. Now they rode with purpose, faces set hard, rifles glinting in the low light. Jack's pulse kicked. He stepped outside, shotgun in hand, as the line of horsemen spread across his fence like a wall of death. The leader from before raised his voice. "This ends tonight, Callahan. You turn them redskins out, or we put you in the ground with M." The Cheyenne moved like shadows from the trees, scores of them, bows drawn, rifles ready. The air went taut, a string pulled to breaking, one spark, and the valley would drown in blood. Jack stepped forward, every eye fixed on him. His gut twisted. If he stayed silent, slaughter would follow. If he spoke wrong, the same. His throat felt like sand, but his voice came steady. "You think this land's yours. You think feeding a hungry child makes me less white. Maybe it does. Maybe I don't care. But hear this. If you fire that first shot, you'll never leave this valley alive." A murmur rippled through the horsemen. Some shifted uneasy. But the leader sneered. "You really gonna throw your lot in with savages?" Jack's jaw clenched. "I'm throwing in with what's right." The man spat, lifted his rifle, and a shot cracked the air. Chaos tore loose. Horses reared. Men shouted. Bullets screamed through the dusk. Jack dove behind the trough, pumping his shotgun, firing into the charge. Warriors loosed arrows swift and silent, felling riders before they crossed the fence. Smoke and fire filled the yard, the world a whirl of noise and death. Jack fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. He felt the recoil slam his shoulder, smelled the iron stink of blood. A rider lunged at him, pistol blazing. Jack rolled, came up with his knife, and drove it home. The man tumbled from a saddle with a strangled cry. Through the haze he saw Gray Fox standing tall, rifle steady, cutting down enemies with grim precision. Running Bird huddled by the barn, eyes wide but unflinching, as if trying to burn every moment into his memory. Jack's chest clenched. He'd saved the boy once. But would it matter if this night swallowed them whole? The fight raged, brutal and fast. Bodies fell. Flames licked the edge of the barn. Jack's breath came ragged, his strength fading. Then he saw it, the leader spurring hard through the smoke, rifle leveled straight at Running Bird. Too far for Gray Fox. Too close for anyone else. Jack didn't think. He ran. The world blurred. He slammed into the rider just as the shot rang, knocking the barrel skyward. Pain seared his side, burning, tearing, but he held on, dragging the bastard from a saddle. They hit the ground hard, grappling in the dirt. The man's fist cracked Jack's jaw. Stars burst behind his eyes. Still he clawed, punched, fought with every shred left in him. At last his hand found the knife at his belt. One thrust, deep and final, and the man went limp. Jack staggered to his feet, vision swimming. The gunfire slowed. Then silence, broken only by the crackle of fire and the whimpers of dying men. The settlers who could still ride were fleeing into the night, their courage spent. The yard was littered with bodies. The barn smoldered, but held. Jack swayed. Hand pressed to the wound in his side. Blood seeped hot between his fingers. Gray Fox appeared, steadying him with an arm. Their eyes met, no words, just the weight of survival shared between men who had stood at death's edge together. Running Bird crept forward, small hands trembling as he touched Jack's sleeve. His eyes shone with something Jack hadn't seen in years. Trust, maybe even love. The chief spoke low. "You fight like man with no tribe. Tonight you earn one." Jack tried to smile, though his lips were slick with blood. "Don't know if I deserve one." Gray Fox shook his head. "Deserve? No man ever does. You live, you belong. That is enough." They carried him inside as the stars burned cold over the valley. He lay on his cot, drifting in and out, the sounds of the Cheyenne moving through the night, tending wounds, speaking low prayers, filling the silence he had once guarded with walls and whiskey. Now it was different. Now it was life. And as the dawn came, pale and unsteady, Jack Callahan realized something he'd spent years denying. A man could build his fences high, could hide from the world behind boards and bitterness, but sooner or later, the world found its way in. Sometimes it came as fire and blood. Sometimes it came as a starving child. Either way, it came, and you had to choose who you were when it did.